Hi there, and welcome to a very special edition of Power Play on this Tuesday. I'm Vassy Kapelos in Ottawa. Tonight, an exclusive sit-down with Prime Minister Mark Carney as he introduces his brand new cabinet. Two weeks after winning a minority government, Prime Minister Mark Carney introduced his front bench, 28 cabinet ministers and 10 secretaries of state, some familiar faces, but in total, 24 members newly elevated to the Prime Minister's inner circle. Just after making it all official, the Prime Minister sat down with us here at CTV News in the very room where he will shortly convene his new cabinet for his first Canadian broadcast interview since winning the election. Have a listen to our conversation. Hi, Prime Minister. Pleasure to host you today. Thank you very much for making the time.
Thanks for having me, Vassy.
I wanted to start off on your cabinet selections, and in particular, whom you selected for your front bench, because I think a lot of Canadians, physically would have looked at that front bench today and said it looked remarkably like the previous government. Is that not the opposite of what they elected you to do?
Well, there's a number of things that are different in that front bench. So if you look, for example, François-Philippe Champagne is the Minister of Finance. He became the Minister of Finance when I became Prime Minister for that brief period following winning the leadership election. Lots of experience, but not the Minister of Finance. Now he's going to have a real run at being Minister of Finance. Mélanie Joly moving from Foreign Affairs to becoming Minister of Industry. This is a government that has a huge focus on the economies and specifically cost of living, but really growing wages and jobs for Canadians. So she has a crucial role, but it's a new role for her. Dominic LeBlanc as the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. I need experience in that role that Dominic has. He's got great relations with a number of the premiers. We are going to focus on building one Canadian economy, changing how we're doing big projects, all in the course of the next several months. Plus, he's been one of the main, if not the main, interlocutors with the level of the U.S. government below President Trump. So I don't want to switch everybody out in that circumstance. And then, you look at Anita Anand, who's moving into foreign affairs. It's a big change into those jobs. So there's some similarities. There's experience being deployed in different ways. I'm a new Prime Minister, and let's look at the cabinet as a whole, because I'm not quite sure I make the distinction between the, quote, front bench and the cabinet as a whole. We only have 28 cabinet ministers. That's down from the mid-upper 40s, some previous governments. Half of those ministers are new. Never been cabinet ministers before. In many cases, they're new to Parliament as a whole. So we're bringing in a lot of fresh energy, fresh ideas, fresh perspectives, alongside with experience. And that's a good team. That's a good management team, in my judgment. Obviously, I spent a lot of time trying to construct it that way.
And I do take the point on the fresh faces, but even when you point to the experience of those who are in the sort of biggest roles, the reason why I highlight them is because they were at the forefront of the decisions that the previous government made.
I disagree with that.
They were. I mean, Mélanie Joly, François-Philippe Champagne, he led the industrial policy. Now he'll be in charge of finance. Dominic LeBlanc led a lot of those files as well. We are used to hearing from them, justifying and explaining the decisions that Justin Trudeau made. Well, so now we're going to hear from them again.
Well, first off, now you're hearing from me. I'm a new Prime Minister. I'm the 24th Prime Minister of Canada. I've got very clear set of objectives, which I laid out in the course of my initial government from that cabinet table. Cancel the carbon tax right there. In fact, just to our right is my first act. But developing this focus on one Canadian economy, getting rid of internal trade barriers. We'll do our job by Canada Day. That means the federal government. We're working with the provinces so that they can move out of the way. Some of them are moving really fast, Nova Scotia, Ontario, others moving fast. We're trying to get all of them. But plus unlocking these major projects that are going to build this economy for the next generations, not just growth today, but growth for generations. That's a focus. That is an entirely new focus of this government. At the same time, we're working on this economic security partnership with the Americans and diversifying our trade partnership. Different focus, different people. I'm bringing a different, there are so many differences. As I say, half of the cabinet is different. Big change in terms of priorities. Big change in terms of speed. This is one of the fastest swearing in Canadian history. It will be one of the fastest returns in Parliament in Canadian history. You'll see with the speech from the throne, which the King will deliver in whatever it is, 12 days' time, 13 days' time. And in that speech from the throne are going to enumerate some priorities, including success by Canada Day. So we're going to go hard.
So how do you articulate, because you conceded today, you did through the campaign, that the mandate you have is one for change. It's against that backdrop that I'm asking those questions about those big faces for your cabinet.
I think,
how would you articulate to Canadians like what that change will actually look like? Is it just you?
So, well, no. Okay, if I may, you are going into process and personnel. I'm going to results. I'm talking about one Canadian economy. I'm talking about getting rid of all the federal
But
barriers.
those personnel didn't deliver.
No. Please, let me answer the question. Those are real results that will happen or not. We will either pass that legislation or not. First point. Secondly, in terms of working with the provinces, working with Indigenous peoples, working with the territories, identifying the nation-building process, a process that has already begun. I helped start it during my first few days as Prime Minister in the previous mandate, now going to accelerate through, already talking with Premier Smith, Premier Moe, Premier Ford, Premier Legault, all the premiers about, Premier Canoop, sorry, now I'm going to offend somebody because I haven't mentioned them all, but they're all working on this and working towards our Saskatoon First Ministers meeting, June 2nd. Again, that's a tangible thing. You'll see where we're coming together on specific projects. What's the federal government doing to support those? What are we doing with respect to our relationship with the United States? So these are all real things. And to reduce it, to faces, personnel, and then, by the way, to ignore half of the cabinet, which is brand new, literally, never been in cabinet before, and now they're in very senior roles at core priorities for the government.
It's definitely not to reduce the new people that I ask. It's because, to be fair,
can I remind as well?
Yes, you can, but I want to finish after.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you finish and then I'll.
I was just going to say that, I covered that government extensively. Those are the ministers who told me time and time again the carbon tax was the only way to address climate change, who told me time and time again the only way to be fiscally responsible was to bring in capital gains tax changes. Yes, you came in and you changed that, but these are the people for 10 years who defended what you say you have a mandate to change from. It's not just a personnel thing that I'm asking about.
Let's be clear about mandates. We just had an election, you might have noticed. I think you covered it, right?
Correct.
19 million Canadians voted. More Canadians voted for a political party, the Liberal Party, than ever before. We have more votes than anyone else. We have majorities in 7 of the 10 provinces. We have the most seats in Parliament, and we ran on a very clear platform of change. Canadians, more Canadians chose that platform of change than anybody else's. So we have a clear mandate. I come and all the deputies, Liberal deputies in Parliament come with a responsibility to deliver that change. That's what, Canadians, they put their trust in us. They expect us to deliver. And I'm going to put together the cabinet, the legislative agenda, and work with the provinces, work with Indigenous peoples, work with the territories in order to deliver for Canadians. And Canadians will judge the change that they receive. That's the right thing. And I'll do what's necessary with the people I have around the table in order to deliver that.
All right, that's the first part of my exclusive conversation with Prime Minister Mark Carney. I've got to take a quick commercial break, but we have more of that conversation on the other end of the break. When Mark Carney says he wants to make Canada an energy superpower, does he mean exporting more oil and gas? My question and his answer to it in just 2 minutes.
So there's some similarities. There's experience being deployed in different ways. I'm a new Prime Minister, and let's look at the cabinet as a whole, because I'm not quite sure I make the distinction between the quote front bench and the cabinet as a whole. We only have 28 cabinet ministers. That's down from the mid-upper 40s. Some previous governments. I'm bringing a different. There are so many differences. As I say, half of the cabinet is different. Big change in terms of priorities. Big change in terms of speed.
That's Prime Minister Mark Carney sitting down with me in a room that's normally reserved for cabinet. There you heard the Prime Minister defending his decision to keep much of Justin Trudeau's front bench intact. I also asked about some of the biggest promises he's made to Canadians, and that's exactly where we're going to pick the conversation up.
I want to talk about something a bit more conventional when you talk about big projects, and that is around energy. And in particular, when you said during the campaign you want to make Canada an energy superpower. Mm-hmm. Do you mean you want Canada to export more oil and gas?
Well, that is an element of it, but it's not the element of it. So there are multiple elements. When you're a superpower, let's look at America. America is a superpower. It is a superpower because it has a strong economy. It is a superpower because it has a strong military. Arguably, it is also a superpower because it has soft power, has cultural, the American influence is multiple, and all of those aspects contribute to it. So when I talk about being an energy superpower, I always say in both clean and conventional energies. So what does that mean? Yes, it does mean oil and gas. It means using our oil and gas here in Canada to displace imports wherever possible, particularly from the United States. It makes no sense to be sending that money south of the border or across the ocean. But yes, it also means more exports, without question. But it doesn't stop there. That in and of itself doesn't make us an energy superpower. We can be an energy superpower, and we have all the components in nuclear, in hydro, in potentially in carbon capture and storage, which is going to be one of the determinants of of competitiveness and productivity in a number of sectors. So what are we doing to build out all those aspects in our economy? What are we doing today? And look, if I were, I shouldn't classify myself, but a conventional politician might say, you know what we should be judged by is whether or not we approve one pipeline. Right? And that's going to make us an energy superpower. And that is a type of objective that you can define and you can point to that is progress, but it doesn't accomplish the bigger goals. And it's not at the level of what Canada is capable of. We need to do multiple things at the same time in order to build this base so that we are creating wealth and competitiveness, better lives for Canadians for generations. So we're going to be very ambitious across a range. That's why we're not asking for one nation-building project. We're asking for nation-building projects, and we are going to move as rapidly as possible on as many of them as possible.
I think if I'm accurately representing the point of view from people whose livelihood depends on the conventional energy sector, it's not that they're asking you like, that's it, that's the be-all, end-all. It's that they want to know where conventional energy fits into your ambitions. And it's not just because, if I may, not just because of the record of the previous government, it's because of you yourself, your book Values, for example, which extensively talks about a reorientation of the market around the climate imperative. I think Canadians had been asking throughout the campaign, and now, like, is this Prime Minister Mark Carney of values, or is it the Prime Minister of the campaign? Like, are you going to build that pipeline if the consensus exists?
First off, I've said repeatedly yes, first point. Secondly, that because I understand the need for that consensus, I'm a Prime Minister who can help create that consensus. You can't create a consensus on your own, but you have to drive processes that bring provinces along, bring the private sector in. Remember, I've got extensive experience. This is not just a concept to me. I have been involved in major energy projects for over 3 decades in the private sector. So I've got that experience, bringing the provinces, working with Indigenous partners, putting in place, as we have, billions of dollars of financing for those Indigenous partners, bringing in somebody like Tim Hodgson, who, when he was CEO of Hydro One, was one of the only major corporations to have a major Indigenous partnership program that actually worked. So we're bringing the components in, we have to deliver it. Let me make another point, because I appreciate that you've read my book very carefully. At the core of the way I talk about the energy transition is the future of, including about Canada being an energy superpower, is the future is low risk. Canada's low risk is a business investment place. Low cost, we're getting the cost down, including the oil sands, the marginal production is low cost, and low carbon. All three of those come together. We have the ingredients of all that. Let's get together and move on it. And it takes more than just one pipeline in order to accomplish.
And I do understand that point, but I think, like, in your book, multiple occasions, for example, you talk about the merits of a carbon tax. And now we have a different Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who says, the first thing I did in this very room was get rid of the carbon tax.
Got rid of the consumer carbon tax,
correct,
which is different than
the industrial side, but it's still a portion of the carbon tax scheme that existed in this country.
How much of the resources did that how much of the emission reduction did that consumer
9%.
Carbon tax? Yeah, well, it's actually 6, but if you extrapolate it out to 2030,
if it went as far as it was supposed to go, it's not nothing.
It's not nothing. It's not much. It's not much, and we can do much better with different approaches, including collaborative approaches, which is what I'm looking to do. And look,
how can you be collaborative?
If you want a simple answer on will I support building a pipeline? Yes, that simple answer. I've given that multiple times. But I don't stop at that. I don't stop at, for example, if you want a simple answer on how do I make homes more affordable, I could just say, we're going to cut GST on homes. But that doesn't solve the problem. Just doing one pipe, it's good. Don't get me wrong, it's good. That's a positive thing, and working collaboratively in order to happen. But it's not enough. It's not enough to make Canada an energy superpower. It's not enough to build our full potential. It's not enough to truly get incomes growing across the country. We can do much more. We are going to be very, very ambitious. Build big, build bold, build now.
It does speak, though, to what people in Alberta and Saskatchewan who didn't vote for your party are worried about, right? They are worried that it is the Mark Carney of values, it is the Justin Trudeau government, and the reason I ask about that is against that backdrop, right? You are still saying you're going to keep C-69 in place. You are going to keep the emissions cap in place. They view that as evidence of something. They view that, pardon me, as evidence of something that runs counter to what you're saying right now.
What I've said very clear. Look, I am a pragmatist. I go over and over on this, and I really am. I'm interested in results. So the point of building a pipeline, the point of building out carbon capture is to get the results, to get those barrels to the market, to get carbon down. You can do both. We have the capability to do more. And we have the capabilities financially, from a technological perspective, in terms of the companies. Federal government can play a role. The Alberta, province of Alberta, obviously other provinces, Indigenous people have to come along for almost all of these projects in order for them to actually work. And what I'm putting on the table is, okay, let's go. Let's not talk about this. Let's roll up our sleeves. Let's focus in on specific projects and let's work on them together. Now, very constructive, sorry if I may, constructive conversations with Premier Moe in this vein, also with Premier Smith in this vein. So the next stage of that is to sit down across premiers and other groups and start to refine that list and move forward. And we will change things at the federal level that need to be changed in order for projects to move forward.
Does that include C-69 or the emissions cap?
It could include both. Absolutely could include both. But I'm not going to do it conceptually. I'm going to do it on specifics. Do it for moving forward. And that's the point. The test is Canadians deserve results, not rhetoric and not talking past each other. And one of the things that I feel very strongly about and understand, I think from both being in the private sector and working across government over the years, is you can't get results unless you work across partners. So it's the federal government, it's the provinces, it's the companies, it's Indigenous peoples. You can't get result if you just say, we're not going to have environmental assessment. The Harper government tried that approach, effectively tried that approach. It doesn't work. You get tied up in court. So what you have to do is to work together for an efficient and effective environmental assessment process. What we have clearly signaled, and we've been absolutely clear, I've been very clear about this, is we will rely on provincial environmental assessments as appropriate. That is a huge shift in approach that potentially unlocks a series of projects. You have to do other things at the same time. Again, roll up our sleeves, sit down, map out what needs to be done. We've got the team here, and we have the will to do it.
I'm already getting the wrap sign, and I apologize. I know your time is very limited. I wonder if I could ask very briefly on how Parliament will work on what you just mentioned. Have you spoken to Pierre Poilievre about seeking support from the Conservatives in advancing parts of that agenda?
Mr. Poilievre and I spoke after the election, immediately after the election. He congratulated me, and I signaled to him that if he was, as he is, seeking a by-election, I would call it as soon as I'm allowed to do that. So that was the conversation that we've had. He's not the leader of the opposition, as you know, at the moment. So any conversations, obviously, at least in the near term, would be with Mr. Scheer.
Have you explicitly had any conversations with anyone from any party about crossing over to help form a majority? No. When you called Donald Trump transformative, did you mean transformative in a good or bad way?
Yin and yang. There's both.
There's both?
I said what I said. He is. What matters for Canadians is that the relationship with the U.S. has changed. I've been clear about that for months. I think others were very slow to recognize that. I think it's now increasingly understood. Secondly, that it has bigger ramifications than just the U.S. The way the global economy is working is changing. We need to change. Working with President Trump, working with his team as possible, sovereign nation to sovereign nation, that's what I'm pursuing.
Do you plan to renegotiate USMCA? Can you trust him as a partner?
The sequencing, we'll see about the sequencing. I think the revealed preference of the U.S. is working on some of these sectoral aspects before broader trade deals. It is an advantage to us that USMCA exists. It is not right that it's being violated, but it is still an advantage that it exists. And we intend to make the most of our advantages in these negotiations.
Do you trust him?
I will work with them and negotiate with them, yeah.
But do you trust him?
Look, my answer is my answer.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Prime Minister, I appreciate it very much. Thank you for all your time.
Thanks.
That is Prime Minister Mark Carney in his first broadcast interview since winning the election. There is even more to that conversation, a section in the middle primarily focused on the economy and some of the promises that the Prime Minister has made about growing the economy and what it means for you. You can catch all of it this Sunday on Question Period, 11 a.m. Eastern. Of course, we'll also put it up online, ctvnews.ca. We've got a ton to analyze, not just from that interview, but on the cabinet picks that were just made by the Prime Minister. With us to do that after a short commercial break, our front bench, Christy Clark, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. We're back in a moment with them.
So there's some similarities. There's experience being deployed in different ways. I'm a new Prime Minister, and let's look at the cabinet as a whole, because I'm not quite sure I make the distinction between the quote front bench and the cabinet as a whole. We only have 28 cabinet ministers. That's down from the mid-upper 40s, some previous governments. I'm bringing a different. I mean, there are so many differences. As I say, half of the cabinet is different. Big change in terms of priorities. Big change in terms of speed.
That's Prime Minister Mark Carney with me this afternoon, speaking from the Cabinet Room, where he will soon convene his first meeting with the team he introduced today. Let's tell you a little bit about that. Carney's core cabinet is smaller than Justin Trudeau's at 28 members, but he's also added in 10 secretaries of state who hold roles akin to a sort of junior minister. In total, there are 24 new faces in the group, but most of the major portfolios were handed to experienced ministers, hence my line of questioning about whether there is all that much change. Anita Anand, for example, becomes Foreign Affairs Minister, moving over from her latest portfolio in industry. François-Philippe Champagne, who was named Finance Minister just before the election campaign got underway, stays in that role. Sean Fraser, who helmed housing and immigration under the Trudeau government, said he wasn't going to run and then decided to run again. When Mark Carney became leader, moves over to the portfolio of justice and becomes the Attorney General. Chrystia Freeland stays in cabinet, holding the portfolio of transport and internal trade. Stephen Guilbeault keeps the portfolio he got just before the election campaign, national identity, culture, and official languages. He adds the last part to his portfolio. Melanie Joly, the Foreign Affairs Minister for a number of years, moves over to the Ministry of Industry. Dominic LeBlanc holds Canada-U.S. trade, so he will focus on that as well as intergovernmental affairs. He'll be the point person for the federal government to oversee relationships with the provinces, but he's now got a new title added to his ministry. One Canadian Economy is what it's called. And then David McGuinty moves from public safety over to defense, replacing Bill Blair. Some high-profile new additions to cabinet include Tim Hodgson at Energy and Natural Resources, He used to work at Goldman Sachs. He also was an advisor to Mark Carney when he was the governor of the Bank of Canada. Gregor Robertson, former mayor of Vancouver, takes on the portfolio of housing. Lena Diab, a former provincial minister of immigration in Nova Scotia, becomes the federal minister of immigration and refugees and citizenship. And Marjorie Michel, former deputy chief of staff to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, also his replacement in the riding of Papineau, becomes the Minister of Health. A couple notable exceptions not in cabinet today include, as I mentioned, Bill Blair, former Minister of Defense, kind of a minister throughout the Trudeau years in a number of different capacities, and Jonathan Wilkinson, who was the Minister of Natural Resources. Here's how Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre reacted to the new picks.
The first disappointment is, unfortunately, his cabinet. He appointed Trudeau's old team and Trudeau's old advisors. Stephen Guilbeault, whose radical green agenda would shut down all future developments in our resource industry, is still the minister responsible for Quebec. Sean Fraser was the immigration minister who caused the immigration crisis, the housing minister who gave us the housing crisis, and now he's the minister responsible for addressing the Liberal crime crisis. It seems like he is the master at failing upward.
So let's get some more reaction to not only the new cabinet, but our interview with the Prime Minister. With me tonight, our front bench, former BC Premier Christy Clark. She's a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt is here. She's the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is with us, as is the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Rob Benzie. Hi, everybody. It's very nice to see you. Rob, I'll start with you. I started off talking to the Prime Minister about the cabinet shuffle because I think there is a lot of change in 24 new faces. But physically, like that front bench during the ceremony was very much the people that we, have become used to helming the biggest portfolios under the last government. What do you think the message was that they were trying to deliver today, that the Prime Minister was trying to deliver?
Well, Vassy, I think as the Prime Minister said to you, he was trying to take experienced ministers and move them to new roles. But he's the change. And I thought it was interesting when he kind of interjected and said, I'm the Prime Minister, and he is the change, and he's embodying that change. I think that some of the other people that he's brought in are really interesting. Lisa and I were at a luncheon yesterday here in Toronto, Empire Club luncheon, where Peter Bethlenfalvy, the Ontario Finance Minister, gave a shout out to Tim Hodgson, who is now the Energy Minister, Federal Energy Minister. And I thought that was intriguing because, of course, Hodgson was the CEO of, or the chair of Hydro One, which is a pretty progressively run utility here in this province. And he's another brainy kind of Goldman Sachs corporate guy that I think that's the kind of tone that the new Prime Minister wants to inject into this. It didn't look to me like the kind of cabinet where it's trying to tell you how to live your life. It's sort of like we're going to be more competent and govern better. And if they can succeed in doing that, they could be successful and be around for a long time. If they aren't successful, well, Poilievre is waiting in the wings.
Tom, what message do you think the Prime Minister was trying to send with this cabinet today? And ultimately, do you think he was successful?
I think he was successful. I mean, the trick was trying to keep a lot of the older players and show that there was a certain amount of change. It is a bit of sleight of hand, this whole question of the junior ministers, call them what you may. I mean, Trudeau had actually gone down that path. And then you remember when it was, because it's 2015, equality, women and men. Yeah. Elizabeth Thompson penned a paper pointing out that the women were making a lot more than the men because they were the junior ministers. So he's gone back to that formula, although he seems to have avoided a bit the trap. When you see that many key people from the Trudeau era, I don't think he quite succeeded in separating himself from there. When you see François-Philippe Champagne and Melanie Joly and so many others still there in the front bench. One of the things that he did accomplish is in the energy file, and I think that he's going to be recognized for that, both in Alberta and Saskatchewan. The tandem of Wilkinson and Guilbeault has been broken. Guilbeault's off to other things. There'll be a softer part of that might come into his wheelhouse. But overall, the departure of Wilkinson almost became inevitable with the addition of Gregor Robinson, and there's just so much place in cabinet for that many people from the same province. But I think that Wilkinson, while working very hard in the file, wasn't able to move it forward. And I think that people in the resource-producing provinces are going to breathe a bit of a sigh of relief and say that this is good. One mystery, if I might, is Carlos Letao. Yeah. It's very difficult to understand how the people around Carney recruited him back. He is at the highest level. He's somebody super recognized for being the creme de la creme. He's that good. And all of a sudden, he's got nothing. So there's obviously a backstory there. There are already people who are talking about the fact that he perhaps had been slotted for finance, but of course, Champagne was having none of it. And maybe there was something lower than that offered to Latau, who just said, no thanks, and he's going to be a backbencher. You don't come back from the highest level, you're at the highest level of politics, you leave politics altogether, and you accept to come back. It's certainly not to be a backbencher, certainly not with somebody with that skill set. Also heard rumors that, of course, Bill Blair was still on the list as of this weekend. Again, what happened over the weekend to make him disappear from that list, that hasn't come out yet, but you know, as I do, that in the fullness of time, these things eventually make their way out.
Yeah, there's a few people, Lisa, that weren't going to run, like Sean Fraser and Anita Anand, or even Wayne Long, who then decided to run again when it was Mark Carney and not Justin Trudeau leading the party, and all three of them ended up in cabinet, with Wayne Long serving in a Secretary of State position. Your thoughts on what stands out to you, and strategically what you think the objective is here?
Well, I always hate it when ministers leave and make the statement that it's about their families, because invariably something happens and that it puts in juxtaposition, oh, I guess you don't love your family that much after all. I mean, the reality is that I would expect that all three expected that they were going to be unemployed at this time, as opposed to being back in cabinet. So they're going to continue on and do the job that they've been assigned. I found some of the picks very interesting. If I were to characterize the choices on environment and natural resources, while individually they may be good, if you look at it from a collective whole, the entire oil and gas sector is now going to be run out of downtown Toronto, the 416, because that's where those two ministers hail from. And I don't know whether or not that's going to sit well with respect to our oil-producing provinces, Saskatchewan, Alberta, Newfoundland and Labrador, British Columbia, and that could be a problem going forward. So that means that Dominic LeBlanc is going to have a lot on his scorecard. I would also mention, Vassy, too, that I'm very confused by some of the overlapping nature of all of the ministries. For example, Dominic LeBlanc has the One Canadian Economy, but Chrystia Freeland's in charge of interprovincial trade. Dominic LeBlanc has U.S.-Canada relations, but Nita Anand is the Foreign Affairs Minister. There's some stuff in there that obviously is going to have to get settled. And I think in fullness of time, we'll see the cabinet committees and whether or not there's going to be an inner kind of cabinet. One last thing I would like to point out from your interview with the Prime Minister, he indicated that, this is one of the smaller cabinets. He's actually, I'm sorry, Prime Minister, you're incorrect. PCO's own information puts out the fact that the Harper government had ministers around 26 or 27 with extra ministers of state to bring the whole ministry up to about 37 or 38. He himself has 28 ministers today. It is exactly the same as it was in the past. There's no great kudos on keeping it to 28 today.
What do you think, Christy? I mean, I listened very carefully to what the Prime Minister said in his press conference and in our interview. He clearly wants to denote change through himself. And I think he is convinced that that will be enough to convince Canadians that that mandate for change that he concedes was, a part of, was the thing during the campaign, is actually something that can come to fruition. Do you think it's possible? I mean, you've been at the head of a government, right? Like, is it enough that one person can convey that much change?
Yes, it is possible. Because, and it has to be possible because when I've appointed 3 cabinets, and I'll tell you, you're dealing with who voters give you. And you have, so for example, in a province, you'll have regions you want to have represented, you'll have gender parity or not, you'll have ethnic representation, those kinds of things that you're thinking about. And so there's some real limitations on how you can make a cabinet. And I think he's done a very good job of looking amongst the, the flowers that Canadians have sent him in the election and deciding to put together the right bouquet for the country. It's not perfect, there's no doubt about it, but I do think that, and it's never going to be perfect, but I do think, he's really showcasing the economic chops of some of these guys. Champagne is very, very good. He's an excellent appointment. Anand is very smart. She understands where money comes from. Tim Hodgson, again, another great choice, I think, because you have to understand that money only comes from investment, private sector, creation of ideas and new things. And those 3 people in particular, Dom LeBlanc as well, I think, really get that. So he's got a few key guys who get the vision, who understand how to implement it. And I think he's a guy who's who's shown he can really make sure that he is hand on the tiller for the whole thing. I think, you know, the other thing, the only thing I would worry about in this is that in terms of British Columbia, which is really important for more pipelines, whether that's LNG or gas or oil. There are a lot of people in that cabinet from British Columbia, or some from British Columbia, who are dead opposed to making anything happen. So we should look at the big picture. I think that's really good. I think that more granularly, because it's just, you know, some of the people he elected and some of the flowers that voters sent him in terms of the group, it could be a little bit more difficult in places like Quebec and British Columbia when you think about pipelines going to either coast.
Well, you leave us on the perfect note, because we're going to pick the conversation, up on the other end of a break, focus very much on what the Prime Minister said in our interview around the possibility of pipelines, around C-69 and the emissions cap, making some news on all those fronts. So we'll dissect that with our front bench very shortly after a quick break. Stay right there.
You are still saying you're going to keep C-69 in place. You are going to keep the emissions cap in place. They view that as evidence of something. They view that, pardon me, as evidence of something that runs counter to what you're saying right now.
What I've said very clear. Look, I am a pragmatist. I go over and over on this, and I really am. I'm interested in results. So the point of building a pipeline, the point of building out carbon capture is to get the results, to get those barrels to the market, to get carbon down. You can do both.
That is Prime Minister Mark Carney in conversation here with CTV News, his first broadcast interview since since winning the election, I should say, and becoming Prime Minister. We talked a lot about what's happening with energy, in particular that the Prime Minister is promising to make Canada an energy superpower. I asked him whether that meant conventional energy, so specifically, are we going to export more oil and gas, and how to reconcile that with many of the positions he took prior to becoming Prime Minister. Let's talk a bit more about that with our front bench. Christy Clark, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie are back. Tom, I'll start with you. The most notable thing he said in the interview around energy is that he is open to the idea of C-69, which was a major irritant for Alberta and Saskatchewan, and ultimately faced a challenge in the Supreme Court, not being part of, I guess, the process that leads to major projects, and also the emissions cap, which is a big part of the climate plan. And during the campaign, his party had indicated that they would stick by. What does his answer on that, the fact that he appears to be movable on those two big irritants to the resource patch, what does that say to you?
It says to me that Mark Carney is a pragmatist who knows that it is actually possible to do both at the same time, to bring down our carbon footprint and to start acting on development of our resources. It just hasn't been tried so far because we've been always caught in Canada. We've been talking such a good game on acting to lower greenhouse gases, but we never actually get it done. And don't take my word for that, Vassy. Every successive report of who's named in Canada to look at these issues of sustainable development has concluded that the Liberals under Trudeau simply never got it done. So I think that what Carney is pleading for there is, give me a chance. I've been at this for a while. I've worked in the private sector. I know actually how to get results. One of the things that keeps coming up is Quebec, as if Quebec was still a bottleneck. This just in, François Legault has been doing yoga poses, twisting himself into positions, trying to make people understand that he's not anymore opposed to having this type of pipeline go across Quebec. That's a huge sea change in Canadian politics. And yet it goes practically unnoticed because we keep repeating as if Quebec was going to be blocking this. So Carney is very much in favor of using the blessing that is Canada's natural resources positively, but without saddling future generations, of course, with a huge environmental problem that we wouldn't have addressed. And that's why he talks about carbon capture and storage. In the environmental world, I've been an environment minister and I wrote a law on sustainable development. I know that it's taken as a given that carbon capture and storage is a fantasy. Guess what? It's not. And Canada is one of the leaders and we can continue to work on it. So I think that Carney deserves to be given a chance on this. And we'll see whether or not he's able to bring Alberta and Saskatchewan and BC and Newfoundland, Labrador, but mostly Alberta and Saskatchewan in terms of the proportions of it on side. And I think that there's every hope that he can do just that.
Let me circle back to where you left off, Christy, before we took a commercial break, which is there are the Tim Hodgins, who are now overseeing a very important file in natural resources and energy. That's a clear signal sending when you're taking Jonathan Wilkinson out of cabinet. At the same time, you've got Julie DeBruzen overseeing environment and climate change. You're getting some early reaction out of Alberta. Fairly hesitant on what that means. Like, I think she is viewed as one of those people who doesn't want to see. She could correct the record, I'm sure, but I think that's the perception of her. You've got some people in BC with similar views. Is it going to be harder than the Prime Minister is making it seem to get that stuff built?
Everything is harder than you think it's going to be. Building anything is really, really hard. We built, I mean, we were a big part of the approvals for the TMX pipeline, and my government also did the coastal gas pipeline and LNG in British Columbia. And so I can tell you, it was way harder than we thought it would be. There's no doubt about it. I don't know. I don't think the new environment minister is necessarily going to be somebody people need to really worry about. I mean, there needs to be an environment minister, and she seems like a sensible woman who's going to try and figure out, the Mark Carney formula here, which is we can do both. And I'll give you a good example of that. When we ship our natural gas, whether it's from British Columbia to Asia or from Nova Scotia to Europe, you end up with cutting potentially coal-fired emissions by 40%. What an incredible contribution we're making to climate change around the world. So I think he has found a really good balance. The one thing I noted, though, in your interview, which was great, by the way, was he said in response, Canada is a low-cost, low-risk country for investment. And the fact is, today, it is not. The high-risk premium that the Trudeau government put on everything and the amount of time that it took for something to be approved meant that we have become considered a very high-cost, high-risk place. And we need people in the cabinet, I think he's appointed some of them, who are going to be able to spend some time with our partners overseas and convince them that Canada's back. We want to build, and we're not going to drag things out for you for a decade.
Do you need consensus around the cabinet table to sell that message, Lisa?
Yeah, you do. And Mark Carney broke one of the, I guess, traditional rules of politics today in that he's giving timelines and predictions for outcomes. That's not something you do as a politician. You never give a timeline because you're going to be held to the timeline. And politicians know that there's a lot of things that can happen on your way to a timeline, especially when you don't control all the factors. And Christy is exactly correct. Canada is not viewed as a jurisdiction that's easy to do business in. And with respect to the Impact Assessment Act, Bill C-69, the Supreme Court has struck down portions of it. And where that brings uncertainty is we don't really know what's going to be said in its replaced parts. If you have to read down the act because it impinges upon provincial jurisdiction, exactly what do you have to comply with in the act? So leaving it as is actually isn't a go forward position for this government. They actively have to do something with respect to this piece of legislation, and that'll be something that the new minister is going to have to usher through Parliament, which isn't easy to do when you're a first-time minister. And lastly, I would say with respect to Julie DeBruzen, she is one of those unique individuals who was both parliamentary secretary to the environment and to natural resources. This woman knows her files. She absolutely knows how to get things done, or she absolutely knows how to throw a spanner in the works. I'm hoping that she's on the side of getting things done, and that when the Prime Minister says we're going to build a pipeline, that we go ahead and build a pipeline. Removing the uncertainty is so important. As Greg Ebel, who's the president of Enbridge, said, they're ready to rock if the conditions are right. And I take him at his word. I believe him.
I think it is notable, Rob, though, that you have a Prime Minister right now who is saying, ask me if I'll build the pipeline, I'll build the pipeline. Yeah. I'm not wedded to C-16. Even that is a migration from the campaign. C-69 and the emissions cap, both of which have been brought up quite extensively by the premiers of Alberta and Saskatchewan as things that, if they could cross them off the list, would go a long way to allaying the kinds of concerns that existed over the last decade. Like, I don't think it's nothing that he's leaving the door open for all of those things, or even explicitly saying that he supports a pipeline. Like, they built TMX and didn't even want to talk about it.
Yeah, exactly, Vassy. I think your interview just now might have done wonders for national unity. It might there's separatist fueled grievances in Western Canada and Alberta. It's not a good situation. The Premier Daniel Smith is kind of opening this can of worms. But I'm reminded that the new Prime Minister was the Bank of England governor in 2014 when the Scottish independence referendum was held, and he was instrumental in helping Prime Minister David Cameron's Conservatives win that referendum, or ensure that the Scots didn't vote to secede, by telling them, by intervening and saying, look, you're not going to be using the British pound necessarily if you have an independent country. And I think he's used to dealing with secessionists and secessionist forces. And I think that experience, I think he displayed that in your interview without even mentioning secession, just by saying, yeah, we're not wedded to C-69 or these emission caps, which are a huge, huge problem in Alberta. And I think if I'm Daniel Smith tonight, I'm thinking, I'm watching that interview and I'm thinking, I can work with this man.
Okay, I got to leave it there. Let's see what happens. That Premier's meeting with the Prime Minister happening just a few weeks from now in Saskatoon. Thanks to our front bench. Appreciate your analysis. Christy Clark, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Enzi will take a quick break. More Power Play on the other end of that break. Welcome back to Power Play. A significant day here in Ottawa with the Prime Minister making his selections for a new cabinet. 24 new faces, but a lot of very familiar faces as well. The total size of cabinet, 29 plus, including the Prime Minister, plus 10 so-called secretaries of state who will kind of serve as junior ministers. Some of the bigger names: Anita Anand moves over to Foreign Affairs. Melanie Joly vacates that position and heads over to Industry. François-Philippe Champagne, who was the Minister of Finance just before the election was called, remains in that position. Sean Fraser from the riding of Central Nova in Nova Scotia becomes the Justice Minister and Attorney General. He used to be the Housing Minister, before that Immigration. He wasn't even going to run in this election, but decided to come back into the fray once Mark Carney became the leader of the Liberal Party. Chrystia Freeland, you can see there, remains on in transport. Stephen Guilbeault no longer in environment and climate change, but instead moves over to a newly created portfolio just before the election again of national identity, and he will also do official languages. Lots more reaction ahead to both that and our interview with Prime Minister Mark Carney. The full interview will air this Sunday on Question Period. I'm going to leave Power Play there. Thank you very much for watching and have a wonderful evening.